I need help, man. I don't know what's going on. I'm fucking scared. None of this makes sense. It just can't be real. I'm sorry, I'm panicking. I never expected something so terrifying and crazy would happen to me. It's currently 1:32 a.m. Just under an hour ago, I couldn't sleep and decided to go out for a smoke. I rolled my spliff, went to the back door and unlocked it. As I opened the door and stepped out, I did realize something was slightly off when I couldn't hear anything outside, the blood rushing in my ears suddenly deafening. I brushed it off and sat down. It was almost pitch black outside, but my eyes would adjust. As I lit up, I began to hear something around the corner, directly opposite side of the house from where I was. It was like this movement. It sounded kind of clumsy. It was uneven and would stop and start. I was put on edge by it, but stayed out there listening to it. It eventually got closer. I could hear it shifting surfaces and making a different sound, going from grass and leaves to the tiles around my house, meaning whatever it was much, much closer than I had realized. My heart dropped. Deciding I'd had enough of this, I put out my spliff and went to go inside, looking in the direction of the back door. I froze. Peeking around the corner was a face and hands just staring at me. It looked eerily familiar, but the darkness obscured the face enough to where I couldn't tell whose face it was. I dared not move a muscle, unintentionally beginning a starting contest from hell. I began to think of an escape route. I could run away from the back door, hop the fence and run to my front door instead. The only problem being that the back door was still unlocked from when I left. I took my chances and in a split second turned and booked it for the fence. Hearing footsteps almost immediately heading towards me at a terrifying, inhuman pace, I screamed as I ran. By some miracle, the footsteps didn't advance enough to catch me, and I made it to my front door, only to realize too late that I needed my keys to get in. I spun around, expecting the worst, only to find not much better. Whatever it was staring at me again. From around the corner, they peeked their head and hands out. I couldn't tell if they were someone I could take in a fight or not because they were obscured by my house in the darkness of the night. But the eyes, it stared at me they bore into me. They were utterly terrifying. Inhuman, predatory eyes. I stared back at whatever it was, not daring to break eye contact, and tried to remember where my keys were. They were either at the back of the house where I was sitting, or they were inside, and in which case, I would have to go in through the back door anyway. Both outcomes meant I was slightly fucked. I stared at this horrible thing. The tension hung thick in the air, and the total silence didn't help. I prayed to whatever deity that I would make it back safely, starting to slightly lose hope but desperately not wanting to admit it. I frantically thought for any kind of solution. I slowly moved my arms down to my pockets for any salvation when I felt my keys. They were on my belt loop the whole time. I moved as slowly as I possibly could as to not make any noise and set it off, still silently praying for this to all be a nightmare. With my back still turned to the door, I slowly felt for the keyhole. I took my keys, raised them to the door, and psyching myself up, turned the key, swung the door open, removed the key, and slammed the door shut behind me. I fell to the floor the second I got in. I didn't realize I was sweating until I was inside and drenched in it. I slowly gathered myself to get up. I planned to go straight to bed, exhausted from the situation and the day beforehand. But it wasn't over. A tapping sounded from the window right next to the door. My heart sunk once again. I didn't want to look, and I couldn't tell you why, but I did look. Inside was just as dark, but I could see from the slightly brighter sky the silhouette of that thing standing right outside the window. I felt its gaze burning into me with pure, seething anger. Within a matter of seconds, though, it backed away from the window and walked off, its footsteps becoming quieter. I was relieved again, until I realized it walked off in the direction of the back door. My heart dropped once more. I had to get there first. I scrambled to my feet and bolted through rooms towards the back door, silently praying again as I ran. As I got closer to the door, I heard its terrifyingly fast footsteps on the tiles outside. I dove towards the door and turned the key that was, thankfully, already there. As soon as I twisted the key enough for it to just about be locked, the footsteps sounded from behind the door and the handle started turning wildly. I barely made it in time. I was relieved once more, almost collapsing on the floor right then and there. I decided to check the rest of the doors and windows through the house. I returned to the back door once I was satisfied to double-check everything. And I did double-check it. Everything was in order, so I went to leave for bed again. Yet I was stopped, again this time by a voice. "Hey!" It spoke. I froze. The voice was weird. I can't describe it well. It was a familiar voice, like a friend or something, but innately wrong. The pitch was inconsistent. It sounded warped and unnatural. "You, open the door." I jumped at the raised voice it used for the last word. It sounded pieced together, like words from a song that might make sense next to each other, but when taken from different parts of the song, it sounds weird. I was completely frozen in place by the voice, unsure of my next move. What I really wasn't expecting, though, was for my cat's meow to come from the cat flap, all distorted and wrong again. It made me want to cry hearing that. I knew my cat was upstairs. He was sleeping deeply on my bed when I left him. I knelt down, and without looking at the plastic window, tried to lock it. I was completely caught off guard when a hand shot through the cat flap and tried to grab me. Thank God it missed me. I jumped back and stared at the dark shape of a disgustingly long arm feeling around for me. It moved in a truly unnatural way, like a giant serpent frantically looking for food. It made me feel sick watching it. Another distorted meow came from the door and failed to lure me to it. When it didn't find me, it felt its way up the door towards the handle and the key that was still in the lock. Without hesitation, I leapt towards it, snatched the key out of the door, and fell back out of its reach again. I seemed to anger it by doing that. "You!" it shouted at me. "This is going to hurt." Its words unnerved me. It was being patient earlier. I wondered if it could have killed me outside. The arm finally slithered back outside, its face replacing it. I wasn't sure which was worse. "I'm gonna come in." The last phrase sounded like someone calling from across the room after someone knocks on the door. It was then that I realized why the voice was so familiar. It was my voice. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wanted to be sick. I ran to the bathroom but stopped in the doorway. The urge to throw up melted away as I looked at the canister of hairspray. I took it with me back to that thing. Its head was pushing the cat flap open when I got there. It was still too dark to see in detail, but I saw my target. I pulled out my lighter and lit it on front of the canister. The slight glow from the flame lit up the room just enough for me to see. I wouldn't have looked at its face given the choice, but I was already looking at it when I sparked the lighter. I was looking at my own face. It looked back at me. My heart dropped yet again. Then it smiled at me. A smile too wide for a human. Its face was wrong in so many ways, yet it was still my own face. I didn't understand what made it so unnatural, but it scared me. After finally snapping out of it, I jammed down on the hairspray. A giant roaring fireball lit up the room in orange and landed straight in its face. It screeched in pain in my voice but didn't back away. I felt the hatred in its glare. I sprayed it again and it screeched again. This time, though, it twisted and contorted its body, slowly fitting through the tiny cat flap. Panic immediately set in. I sprayed it for a little too long and burnt my fingers pretty bad, dropping both my lighter and the hairspray. Its face was still on fire for a few seconds after, yet it was unrelenting. It squeezed and pushed its arms through. After it had one arm, it used it to push itself through. It was a horrifying sight watching it unnaturally fold and crumple parts of its own body to get to me. My fight or flight sense finally took hold of me and sent me sprinting away, shutting all the doors behind me. I'm currently hidden inside my wardrobe. There is blood on my phone from the burns and my fingers are blistering. I can hear it trashing every room it enters. It shouts and screams in what I can only assume is frustration. It keeps speaking in my voice, saying things to scare me, I suppose. It's working. I am scared. I'm terrified. Please, someone help me.